Welcome back. I'd like to welcome you back to World Literature. Today we're going to be talking about a play called Fuente, Ovejuna. Fuente, Ovejuna was written in 1614 by Lope de Vega. Now, Fuente, Ovejuna means well sheep, literally, or it's a town called the place where you can have your sheep watered. Now, Lope was born in 1562 and he lived until 1635. So he was born before Shakespeare in Spain. Lope was born in Spain, and he became the father of Renaissance Spanish theater. He outlived Shakespeare by many years, and Lope was prodigious. He wrote more than 1,500 full-length plays, more than 500 religious plays, and people loved him. I would compare him akin to being the TV channel for people living in Spain at the time. Now, by comparison, and I'm not trying to diss Shakespeare, but by comparison, Shakespeare wrote less than 3 dozen plays. Lope wrote more than 2,000. And he also published many, more than a dozen books of poetry besides. Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, and many other works as well, but Miguel de Cervantes called him un monstruo de la naturaleza, a monster of nature. Cervantes couldn't wrap his head around how, and he was a contemporary, how prodigious Lope was. Lope actually wrote plays 3 at a time at times, where he would be thinking about different plots, and he would jot down a sonnet for one play and then go to the next play. He just cranked them out. Now, this play, Fuente Ovejuna, is very important because it actually pits the idea of government. How does a government rule the people? And in this play, it's the people who end up changing the government. We have a whole cast of characters. I'm using this book right here, but if you don't have it, you can look up the text of the play online. So this is Norton Anthology Volume C. And you can follow along that way. It might be a different translation. This translation was translated by G.J. Rotz. So, how do governments go about ruling the people? Should it be by the consent of the governed? Should it be an enlightened group? Should it be the people who are wealthy? This play calls into question all of those things, and as I mentioned, it was written 400 plus years ago. More than 400 years ago. And this was a time, it's set in 1476. So, more than 100 years before it was actually written. It's set in that time period, and during the 1400s in Spain, what you had was a lot of different kings and queens feuding over all of what we call current day Spain. Not feuding, going to war against each other. We also had Muslims who had come into Spain in the year 711, and Muslims were considered to be dogs, can you imagine calling a person a dog? By the Christians of that era. And Muslims lived in Spain until 1492, which is the year that Columbus got his financing. And why did he get his financing? Because the Catholic kings is what they're called. Isabel, and Ferdinand, they married and they consolidated the peninsula and they focused on driving Muslims out of there. Which probably was a mistake. You know, they had extra money once they kicked all the Muslims out of Spain to finance Columbus' encounter with the New World. But the problem is that when you've had a group of people living in your country for more than 700 years, and they're the ones who are the scholars, you throw all that intellect out of your country. You slaughter many people, of course. And then you end up fighting new lands. How do you govern when you've thrown out all of the medical doctors? Not all of them, but a lot of them. And when you've thrown out the people who understand how to go about doing things. Of course, Ferdinand and Isabella in English, but it's funny, her name's Isabel in English, really. Once they conquered the Muslims, then who do you think you suppose they went after? They went after the Jews, because they wanted to make it a purely Christian nation. Now, this play, Fuente, Ovejuna, by the way, guess who else was a highly educated part of Spain? The Jews. And so you kick out all of the intellect and then all of a sudden you have a world empire. Not good planning. Just not good planning. This play is going to explore the idea of power, and not just political power, although it explores that. So we have political power, but also the idea of personal power. Who has the right to do what they want to do? What does it mean to be a good leader? And we have Fernán Gómez de Guzmán, or the commander. Oh, and by the way, he's from the order of Calatrava. And the order of Calatrava were Christians who were soldiers, and their insignia was a red Greek cross that was completely bloody, a scarlet red. And why? Because they were organized initially, back in the 1100s, to kill Muslims. So they're supposed to be warriors. And we're talking about people who would brag about how many infidels or dogs they had killed. And so we have Fernán Gómez de Guzmán, who has been given the land of Fuente Ovejuna. And when I say given the land, my puppies are barking at each other. When I say given the land, that meant all the people too. And so the commander, he thinks that he has the right to do anything that he wants. This includes raping women, In this play, he'll brag about sleeping with a woman 2 nights after her wedding. He thinks he has absolute control. And anytime you have a leader that thinks in absolute terms, you've got a problem. Now, one of the problems is that Guzman has been given his land grant by a king. And back during this time in European history, not just Spain, but throughout Europe and Russia, all of the Western world, or the civilized world, you see throughout history the idea of the divine right of kings. And what that means and how that was interpreted is that anything the king does is okay because that must be God's will. The closest thing I can think to this is the Egyptian pharaohs, who actually believed and taught their people that they were the embodiment of the gods. Hard to argue with the gods, right? So we've got the commander, Guzman. He is the villain in this play. And he is what you would think he would be if you thought that you owned everybody in your city or your town. You can do whatever you want. He's a horrible, horrible person. And he doesn't care about who he hurts or who he harms. So this is starting with Act 1, where the commander Guzman goes into the master of Calatrava, and these are knights, a military Christian order, to see him and talk about an upcoming war. And he's all upset, the poor thing, because this master of Calatrava is a young man, probably an adolescent boy, maybe 13, maybe 14, and he has to wait. And he's not used to waiting because he has absolute power over the area that he himself governs. The opening line, the master knows I mark my time awaiting him. And his pimp, or his PR person, but it's the same thing in this place, says to him, indeed he does. And his second in his PR says, he's more mature, sir, than he was. So the child has grown up, even though he really hasn't been to battle. And Guzman says, enough to be aware that I'm still Fernán Gómez de Guzmán. And his pimp, Flores, ironically with the name of Flowers, says, he's just a boy, don't take this wrong. But the commander says, he has to have known all along the title that's conferred upon me as commander of the ranks. And Ortuño says, his counselors undoubtedly incline him toward discourtesy. Blame it on his advisors, right? This stance will win him little thanks, for courtesy unlocks the gate behind which man's goodwill resides, as surely as offenses betides an enmity fomenting hate. Meaning that even if he's under the influence of his advisors, he's dissing me. And he better not diss me, because if he does, then I will not be grateful to him. If only man so keen to slight, if only man so willing to harm somebody knew that they were hated, abhorred by all, not least by sycophants who fall. Okay, so sycophant literally means a bootlicker. And if you're aware of our political system here in the United States, or political systems around the world, you will know that there are people who are bootlickers. What do you want me to do next? Should I lick your feet? Yes. Yes, lick my feet. To kiss their feet and praise their might, they'd much prefer to die before insulting anyone again. So they're making a mistake too. And Flores, the pimp, says, mistreatment from unmannered men is harsh and something to deplore, yet while discourtesy between two equals is a foolish game. So if you're an equal and you harm somebody or are rude to somebody, that's a pretty bad thing, right? But it's vile, tyrannical, and mean. No sense to take offense, my lord. He's just a boy and ignorant of the need of your auspicious love. And the commander says, the obligation that the sword he girded on when first his cross of Calatrava graced his chest bids courtesy be shown all, lest our noble order suffer loss. So he's hurt because he feels like he's being mistreated. But it's so funny. He's only hurt because the meeting hasn't started on time. He hasn't had an audience with the master of Calatrava. And at the same time that he talks about being polite and having courtesy, in his personal life, he is anything but that. So then we have the master come in, and he says, the master says, I just found out you were here. Isn't that what you say to somebody who's angry about waiting? Oh, I didn't know you were out here in my office, out here waiting before you came in my office. I just been told that you were come, and I rue this inattention from my own heart's core. And the commander says, I looked upon the matter ill with wounded pride. And pride is an appropriate word for who Commander Guzman is. Pride, one of the 7 deadly sins. In Dante's Inferno, he wrote about the rings of hell and where the different people who would embrace different sins would be. And pride is the very worst sin. And then we hear a whole exposition about how this young man became the commander of Calatrava. So we have a history of succession. And basically, Guzman telling him he needs to treat him well in order to honor his past. And really, it's a veiled threat. If you don't treat me well, I'm going to harm you. And Guzman goes on to talk about the scarlet red cross that he wears, that everybody in the order of Calatrava. And so we're talking about knights here, right? Christian knights. That you need to respect this bloody sign that I wear on my chest. And Guzman, the commander, proposes that the commander of Calatrava give him permission to wage war. And the master responds, Fernan Gomez, it's my intent to side with blood in a dispute whose righteous seems beyond refute. Rest assured of this event. And so he pledges that, let's go kill people. All right? And then the commander asks him, the master asks him, where are you living now? And the commander says, and this is in line 160, he tells him, I live in Fuente, Ovejuna, and the master wants to know, are there lots of soldiers there? And he says, they're loyal servitors, though few. But should you summon them to list with you, to fight with you, they'll fight like lions. For in Fuente Ovejuna, all the townsfolk heed the humble call of agriculture, not of war. It's a town full of people who are living off the land. They are peasants that he has inherited ownership over. And so the master says, I'll give you more soldiers then. Next scene, so scene 2, we are in Fuente Ovejuna, where Commander Guzman resides. And we're introduced to Laurencia and Pascuala. And these are two women. Pascuala has more carnal knowledge than Laurencia. And guess who has had his eye on Laurencia? Our villain here. And so Pascuala is talking to Laurencia about what are you going to do, because any woman he wants, he rapes her. And Laurencia says, I hope he was gone for good. And Pascuala says, to tell the truth, I really thought the news of his return here ought to have perturbed you, and still would. Oh, by the way, Lope wrote all of his plays in verse, from beginning to end. Shakespeare would do blank verse. Shakespeare would include a sonnet here and there, or a couplet. But Lope de Vega always wrote completely in poetry. Laurencia says, I wish to God, I swear to you that we had seen the last of him, because he's been harassing her. Laurencia, I've known girls as prim and tough as you, nay, more than so, who, beneath the guise of harsh facades, have hearts as soft as cooking lard. I've seen women more virtuous than you give in to the commander's lust. And Laurencia gives this nice metaphor here. You couldn't find an oak as hard and dry as I am towards these clods. So already, Laurencia she questions the masculinity, the manhood of really what would be an occupying force, right? And she compares herself to a hard oak, which means that she's using sort of a phallic resistance. And phallic is the adjective, phallus is the word. A phallus is another word for penis. So she's taking on the metaphor that I have the power, I have the penis, and I am not going to let him have his way. And Pascuala says, come on now, you don't mean to say you never drink to quench your thirst? And throughout Western culture, this idea of sex being a type of ingestion, of eating, is very, very common. If you go back to the Song of Songs, we have breasts compared to fruit, women compared to something to be consumed. And Pascuala, who's more earthy, has more carnal knowledge, says, come on, don't you just like a fling once in a while? And Laurencia says, I do, though I won't be the first to have to protest in this way. Besides, how would it profit me to yield to all Fernand's false woo? I couldn't marry him. Why would I bother when I could not marry him? And Pascuala's like, oh, that's a good point. That's true. I can't abide his infamy. So many girls were gullible in trusting the commander's plights, and now live days that rue those nights. So many other women have pretended or believed Fernand Guzman's words, and they've lived to do the the walk of shame in the morning, right? And Pasquale says, still, it'd be a miracle if you don't wind up in his grasp. Pasquale, 1 full month's gone by since you first saw the scapegrace try in vain to land me in his class. It's been a month he's been after me. His pander, and pander means pimp, his pander Flores, the one named Flowers, and that knave Ortuño came by with a hat, so they brought gifts to her from the commander. A hat, a jerkin, and a choker, a necklace that their master had assumed I would crave. And they started off regaling me with vows his love-lorn heart declared, which left me a little scared, though just as disinclined to see myself as his latest conquest, his latest vanquished maid. And I want you to pay attention to the diction, the discourse of war that happens throughout this play. Even today, people will talk about their conquests in our culture, in our American culture, which to me is disgusting, because why would sex be about conquering? Only if there's a problem with you. It should be mutual. And Pasquale asks, where did they speak to you? Oh, down by the brook 6 days ago. And she's going to be back at the brook, because guess what she does in the brook? She washes her clothing and her family's clothing. Pasquale says, Laurencia, I'm afraid they'll end up getting what they wish. From me? No, from the priest. Well, yes, you. So, making fun of the idea that priests are going to be forced to have sex with military officers. And Laurencia says, the meat, once again, going back to the edible idea of the human body, the meat on this young chick he'd woo, that he wants to have, it's too tough to grace his dish. I'd rather take a slice of ham when I wake and place it on the fire to cook, then eat it with a hunk of bread I baked and kneaded by myself with wine, stolen from my mother's shelf, from jugs that tightly store her red wine. And how much happier I'd be at noon to watch beef frolicking with heads of cabbage, rollicking in frothy pots of harmony. She'd rather cook food than have him consume her. Or when I come home peeved and tired to marry eggplant. Notice, to marry eggplant, not to marry him. In full bloom with bacon, there's no rasher groom than that, for just the pick-me-up required. Then later, for some toothsome snacks to hold me till our supper's served, I pick grapes off my vines, preserved by God alone from hell attacks. For dinner, I'd eat a lot of spicy peppered meat and oil. Then go to bed content with toil and give thanks with a lead us not into temptation. So Laurencia is quoting from the Lord's Prayer, from Jesus' prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, where Jesus says, and lead us not into temptation. But you know how men are. And here we have a comment on how men are. Until they get their way. So men want to get their way in love. What skill they use in finding crafty ways to make us in the end forlorn. They find these crafty ways that eventually are going to lead to us being sad about what happened. When worn down, we give up the fight. So once again, a very violent discourse, right? They take their pleasure in the night and leave us wretched. in the morn. And Pasquale agrees. You're right. It's no joke. Once men are sated, once men are satisfied, they grow rude and show us more ingratitude than sparrows do to village folk. And sparrows will come in and chirp happily in the winter time, but once you start growing your food, they eat that too. And Pasquale uses this metaphor about men. They feed upon our crumbs. We hear the last of all their coos. Forgetting our benevolence and cutting off their blandishment, they chirp occasionally, Jews, Jews. And to be a Jew in Spain at this time, when Lope wrote the play, and at the time of the reconquest of the peninsula, to be called a Jew meant you might be put to the rack. You might have to suffer the Inquisition. And that's exactly what Spain proceeded to do after expelling the Muslims from the peninsula. Yes, men are like that too. As long as they desire us, we're their soul, their heart, their everything, their whole life's being, and we can do no wrong. But once the fire of passion's spent, they start to treat us worse than Jews, and what were once seductive coups now chastise us for our consent. And Laurencia says, you can't trust any of their kind. So here we're talking about a play from the 1600s, and Laurencia, or I guess in English it'd be Laurencia. Hold on, let me get that right. Laurencia, she is a feminist voice. A feminist voice for equal and fair treatment. And, by the way, she happens to be in love right now. But not completely head over heels in love. So then we meet Frondoso, and that is who Laurencia is in love with. He enters with his buddies, and he's talking to his friend Barrildo. Barrildo, argue till you're blue, you'll never change old Mango's mind. And that's his other friend. And what they're arguing over is what love is and how language is used at the current time. And the language is used as a type of double speak. Okay, George Orwell wrote a novel in the 20th century called 1984, and he labeled it, one of his concepts was the idea of doublespeak. This is a concept that Lope de Vega, who wrote this play, doesn't know about the label that was put on it later, but it's the idea of taking a word and making that word mean its opposite. So if we go down to where Frondoso, so line 292, Frondoso says, just keeping with the latest style, because he calls them ladies. And they're like, ladies? A lady was somebody who was part of the nobility, and these are peasant women. Why would you call us ladies? I'm just keeping with the latest style. These days, a college boy goes by professor. One-eyed means you're blind. The cross-eyed squint, lame or inclined. And now a spendthrift, someone who wastes money, is a good guy. The dumbest person is called bright. The none too brave are placable. No one has lips, thick lips. Lips are full. And beady eyes are piercing, right? The nitpicker is thorough, while the meddler is engaged. In speech, A windbag, somebody who won't shut up, is well-spoken. Each annoying boor said to beguile. Cowards are dispirited. Blowhards, full of fight. With twits, the useful cats were fellows fits. While loons, crazy people, are, well, uninhibited. You see how Frondoso is talking about the changing of the meaning of words. And Lope, as a wordsmith, as a word artist, he understands that people use language in a way that actually is nonsensical. A current example of this would be from our government, the idea of smart bombs. It's easy to talk about smart bombs. Why? Well, because these are bombs, apparently, that they know what they're doing. And so these bombs are smart enough to only kill the people that you mean to kill them with. They actually call them smart bombs. I'm not making this up. But in reality, all they are is guided missiles that kill everything in their path. And then our government talks about how there are casualties, meaning innocent men, women, and children who are killed. But we don't want to call them innocent men, women, and children. Instead, it's a casualty. I don't know about you, but when I'm being casual, which is all the time, obviously, I'm not thinking of killing anybody. And certainly, I'm not a casualty in the governmental sense. So, he goes on to talk about how well-grounded means someone has big feet. A chest cold means the pox in code. So the pox, he's suffering from a chest cold, meaning he has venereal disease or the plague. The haughty are self-possessed, the shrewd are sly, the humpback shoulders quite a load, that sort of thing. So maybe now you'll comprehend just how you're ladies. And I'll forego with more examples. And Laurencio says, well, that may pass for courtesy from those with city folk, but I've heard other people cloak their thoughts in language that strikes me as far more coarse in every phrase they use and every cutting word. So maybe among the wealthy people, the city folk, you can get away with that kind of crap, but as peasants, as poor people, we want to know what you're saying and say what you know. But this is Laurencia flirting with Frondoso, and he says, give us a taste, once again going back to consuming, of what you've heard. And she says, it's the opposite of praise. Tiresome means serious, brazen means well-heeled, somber, even killed, spiteful is virtuous. If you give counsel, you interfere. Lavish means you freely give. Loving justice means you're punitive. Show mercy and be austere. The steadfast are now dull as sin. Politeness is just sheer flattery. Sweet charity is hypocrisy. And Christian faith is the sure way in. Dumb luck is hard-won merit's name, while truth-telling is recklessness, forbearance, cowardice, misadventure, blame. A decent woman is called a ponce, a proper lovely girl. Well, she's kind of plain, meaning that she's not going to make the world light up tonight. That means she's plain. And plain is another word for ugly. All right? A chaste woman? Well, why should I rack my brain anymore? Let this serve as my response. And Mango, Frondoso's friend, the devil, that was quite a list. And Barildo, she's not a half-bad orator. So, an orator is someone who speaks. They're evaluating her as she's talking. And Mango says, I bet the priest who christened her laid on the salt fist after fist, because putting salt on, if you baptize a baby with water, that's another earth element. And to make, she must have been made salty when she got her name, when she was christened. And so Laurencia says, by the way, why are you guys even here? And if you go over to lines, starting about line 365, Barildo, Frondoso's friend, and Frondoso's in love already with Laurencia, but Barildo contends that love does not exist. And so here we're going to have a whole debate over the concepts of philosophical ideas on what love really means. And this play is asking that exactly. Is love selfish? Is love self-serving? Now we know what Paul says, and I'll write that up for you later, an assignment, so you can read what Paul says about love. But they're arguing right now, according to Barildo, love does not exist. And then Laurencia, though, says love is vital and would sure be missed. Laurencia believes in love, and by love, in her mind, it's not about serving yourself. It's about a mutual enjoyment of another person, something that builds instead of destroys. And Barildo says, yes, vital. It's a silly claim. This world has a most pressing need for love, or life would fade away. So Barildo's argument right there is, love is only lust, or none of us would have been born. And Mango says, philosophy is not my forte, and now I wish I could read. Okay, so Mango is illiterate. He can't read, and this is a throwaway comic line. Well, about philosophy, I'm not strong in it, but boy, I wish I could read. But here it goes, and then he's going to philosophize. If the elements, and throughout the Middle Ages and into Renaissance times, people, and dating back to Greek times, people believed that everything in the universe was composed of 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and air. And based on the meeting of those elements within an individual, that would explain why they do what they do or how they feel what they feel. It's basically a proto-psychology and also proto-medicine. If the elements, earth, water, fire, and air, all live in endless discord and then give our very body sustenance, there's melancholy and, let's see, blood, color, phlegm. Well, I've proved my point. And Barildo says back, this world is nowhere out of joint, dear Mango. All is harmony. Harmony is love distilled, and love pure concert from above. So we had the idea, is love lust? Is love harmony? It's given from the heavens. And Mango says, I don't dispute that natural love abides on earth as God has willed. Love does exist, but of the sort that rules relations in advance. So, I don't know how many of you have been told this, but if you loved me, you would, or it just doesn't seem like you love me anymore because you don't. If that's the kind of love you're after, well, good luck. That's manipulative love. That's what Mango calls ruling a relationship in advance. Compulsory ties, not bonds. Okay. And then he goes on to talk about the idea of self-love. But in Mango's discourse, we find that self-love means only sticking up for yourself. And so he gives examples. And this is in line about 393. If someone tries to punch my face, I block the impact with my arm. And when I'm facing bodily harm, my feet run faster to a safer place. My lids and lashes likewise move to counter danger to my eye, and all from natural love. So the idea of love just being something that is protecting oneself. And Pasquale says, so what point are you trying to prove? I mean that we should be agreed that only self-love rules the day. And Pasquale contradicts him, says, that's not true, Mango, if I may, for isn't there a vital need a man experiences when he loves a woman, or even an animal, a brute, its mate? Yes, but without dispute it is self-love, not true love then. Now, what is love? So what is true love? And for Pasquale, she says, true love is desire. It's desire for beauty. And why does love pursue said beauty in your humble view? For pleasure. Right, exactly. May I inquire then whether this enjoyment might serve self-love? And enjoyment is this euphemism used throughout the Renaissance as having sex. So maybe sex is serving love itself? Well, I'm sure that's so. So self-love then will make love go and seek what causes its delight? Well, yeah. Then as I'm claiming, there can be no love but of the kind that everybody seeks to find by courting pleasure everywhere. And this idea of courting pleasure everywhere is more of an unbridled love, hedonism. So we have Mango preaching hedonism. Love the One You're With is a song from the late 60s, I think, early 70s. So if you're not with the love if you're not with your love the one you're with. And so Barildo says, I seem to have some memory of a sermon I heard by and by regarding, Plato, some Greek guy who taught humanity to love, although the love he felt was aimed at virtue and his loved one's soul. So, are you hedonistic? And Plato is called platonic love is not what my dogs are doing right now. They're barking at each other because I think the female is going in heat and they can't get at each other, so they just have to bark and snarl. Not good to have two little puppies from the same batch with each other, you know what I mean? So Barildo brings up, even though it's some Greek guy, one of the greatest Western philosophers of all time, Plato, platonic love, loving virtue and the soul of a person. And so this isn't romantic love here. This is the idea that you love human beings for who the human being is. Not based on looks, but based on identity, who the person is actually in their thoughts and actions. Pasquale says, this line of thought has on the whole both stumped great intellects and shamed top scholars in our academies who fry their brains debating it. And Laurentia says, she's right, don't fly into a snit by arguing for such fallacies. Go thank your stars for leaving you without love, Mingo, in this sphere. Mingo's like, well, wait, don't you love? just my honor. So Laurencia says that she only loves her honor. And this has several meanings here. Reputation, virtue, chastity, all of the good about herself. She says, I only love my honor. And then Frondoso, who's trying to flirt with her, says, I hope God makes you jealous too. And Barrildo. So who's the winner? Pascuala. You can take that question to the sacristan. If he won't tell you, the priest can. And that should settle what's at stake, because I've not much experience. And our Laurencia loves not well. I wonder how we'll ever tell. And Frondoso is all, I've just been dissed. I've just been dissed. So that's the first part of Act 1. In the next video, I will talk to you about, the first part of Act 1. And the next video, I will complete Act 1 in Fuente, Ovejuna. But in the meantime, start thinking about it. What does love mean to you? There's a book out called Love Languages, and it's about how different people see different things as love. Some people see love as working and supporting another person. Others see love through language. Others see love through touch. This is an argument that's still being had. What does love actually mean? And not to spoil things, but the commander in this play, he has absolutely no concept of love. Self-love, yes, but not of love. Thank you.